Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 35 of the Drew Pavlou Show. Look how nice our setup looks. It's very professional. I've got the lighting on. I've got the beautiful Greek Orthodox icons. And it's going to be a great show today. I'm going to quickly send the link to Stella. And Stella is a British Greek leftist, and she is a critic of some of the anti-migrant right. And we're going to discuss British politics. We're going to discuss Keir Starmer, what he's been doing. It'll be very interesting. Let me quickly share the link out to people, and I'll share the link as well on YouTube. Thank you, guys. If you're watching, let me know where you're watching from. And let me just give me a second to just share the link around. We'll start very shortly. I believe I've got it here. Let me know what you think of the beautiful new setup. I think it's a great thing. I'm very happy, very happy. 1 second, everybody. We're just getting the stream set up. I see that we've got some people joining. Thank you so much if you're joining. I'm just going to set up the stream, and then I will have... Very cool, very cool. Thank you, guys. Watching from inside your house. Thank you, Julian. Watching from Kabul. Great stuff. Hello, Percy. Setup looks right for a reconquista. No, I disavow. Okay. Julian reckons a camera further away feels a little more empty, bro. I don't know. Oh, look, it looks beautiful. Come on, we're trying to do... Isn't that what Nick Fuentes does? We're trying to have a beautiful desk setup. It's going to be a very professional stream. 1 second. And I know Julian loves his Julian Hay. So I just thought... I know Julian loves his Nick Fuentes. So I thought I'd just make that point to him. So I'm sending it to Stella right now. Stella will be joining now. Brilliant. We've got a great stream coming today, guys. We've got a British Greek leftist, Stella Tsantekidou. Someone says it looks amateur. That's just a hater. Forget the haters. We're very proud of how beautiful this setup looks right now. Andrew, watching from Germany. Great stuff. Thank you, mate. I appreciate it. Very cool. Very cool. We're very happy with this beautiful setup. We're very happy, folks. It'll be very interesting. Very interesting. Victor says, finally caught your stream, Drew. Love your work. Greetings from Sweden. Thank you, guys. Very cool to have so many people from across the world watching. We'll have people all across tuning in. It's very interesting. We've got people in Sweden. We've got people from all over watching. We've got a lot of people in Britain as well. Stella is joining us now. I see she's in the back room. I will just 1 second. 1 second. Sorry, Stella. I'll quickly add you on. 1 second. Okay, cool. Stella, thank you so much for joining.
Hello, how are you?
No, very, very good. Very good. Thank you so much for joining. It's really good to have another Greek working in the Anglosphere join the show. I think you're also the first female guest of the show, which is very good. So thank you so much.
Wow.
Yes, very good. Stella, tell us a bit about yourself, and also share the link out to your audience as well. You should. It's good to have a live discussion. We'll have questions as well.
Yeah, let me actually. You know what? Let me do another tweet. Join us live.
No, thank you for joining. Very cool. Very cool.
Great. Tell me, are you actually where you were born in Australia? Do you have?
Yes. By family background, Cypriot, Cyprus.
Okay.
But I was born in Australia, and I've only been to Cyprus one time, unfortunately, and unfortunately also I don't speak Greek as well. So I guess it's interesting. You're from mainland Greece, I think, and also Crete as well.
Yeah, so
Very cool.
so I was born and raised in Thessaloniki. My mom is from Crete,
Okay,
and
very
my
nice.
dad was Pontic Greek. But I moved to the UK for university, and I stayed there ever since. So I have lived all of my adult life. I was in the UK, in London.
Yes.
Yeah. So I
I
guess
think you got. I'm not sure if you can see this on the screen, but there's a comment asking if you're Helen from the Iliad. So you got some supporters here, which is good.
Okay, cool.
Tell us about your journey, how you came to go to Britain. Tell us also a bit about your politics, because I know you describe yourself as a leftist, but you also like to talk to people on the right. You go on GB News and stuff like that. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so as I said, I was born and raised in Thessaloniki in Greece. I came to the UK for university. I was into politics intellectually, but I was never involved in politics in Greece. And I was generally raised in a family where being a member of a political party was seen as a bit too much. And obviously, politics in Greece, they have the reputation of being quite a corrupt space.
Yes.
So I never thought that I would get super into party politics, but I used to read the Wikipedia pages of people whose careers I admired when I was still in Greece. And
Yes.
I would read that they would go and they all had three things in common. They would get involved in student politics in university, in their student council.
Yes. Yeah.
They would campaign with the presidential campaign in the US, and they would become speechwriters in Parliament, in the British Parliament. So I thought, oh my God, that's so amazing, so exciting. Look what politically interested young people do abroad. They have all of these super interesting jobs. I want to go and do that.
Yes.
Oops, sorry, my microphone dropped. And so I went to the UK, and I had these three things that I really wanted to do, and I did all three of them. In 2016, I was an organizer on the Bernie Sanders campaign. I was in Iowa,
Oh, okay.
Nevada,
Interesting.
Ohio, and New York. Yeah, and then while I was in the US, that's when it crystallized in my head that actually I feel really, really invested in the UK and in British politics, and I really miss it. And I remember I would watch PMQs. PMQs is Prime Minister's Question Time in Parliament. We have it every Wednesday. And I would just feel the need to be there. I felt the need to be in London, and I felt like I really, really care about what happens in the UK. So I
Okay.
started applying for jobs in Parliament. It took quite some time. At the beginning, everyone was very discouraging because they said, you know what, it's really difficult as a foreigner to get into British politics. MPs usually like to hire people that they already know, people who know their constituencies very well, who know their voters very well. And it was good advice. It is true. It's very difficult to work in the politics of a foreign country, even in the UK. But eventually, because the British people, I think, are very open minded in the end of the day, um, I did get a job in Parliament. Emily Thornberry, who was then Shadow Foreign Secretary, and she's a very well-known politician here, she had rejected me twice, and then eventually she offered me a job.
Okay.
So that's how I got my in. So yeah, I worked for a few years in British politics. I was in Parliament. Then after right before the lockdown, Labour had lost its third election while I was there. And I felt
Yes.
like I need to move on in my career. I need to do something to get more skills so that if Labour ever is in government, I have something to offer. So I went into the charity sector and I started doing campaigns for them. And then about 2 years ago, I started writing and doing political commentating on TV and on radio. And that's when I
Yes.
realized, oh, actually, I'd much rather do these things by myself. So I recently went self-employed back in December. So
Excellent.
my main brand, I guess, is that I am a left winger who speaks a lot to right wing people. As you said, I go on GB News. I will go on many very right wing shows. I will go to a lot of right wing events. I know a lot of people who are not just conservatives and Tories, but I know people who I would say are literally like fascists, who
Yeah.
self-describe themselves as racist, and I see
Yes.
that as very important for my political education and for what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course, and I have followed you for a while, and I saw your exchange with Kunli Drukpa recently, and this really interesting. Obviously, migration issues are such a hot button issue in Britain right now. Could you explain to us how do you stand politically when it comes to, like, say, Keir Starmer, what he's talking about recently with migration?
Yeah, so the problem with Keir Starmer is that he's a human rights lawyer, right? And
Yes,
he was in fact one of the most respected human rights lawyers in the country. He was one of the founders of a set of chambers that is extremely well respected in public law and in human rights law. He was
yes,
director of public prosecution in the UK, and he is it is that it just doesn't sound like him when he comes out and makes the kind of speech that he makes. So what happened last week was a break from what we've had in the Labour Party for a very long time. So immigration in the UK has been increasing for a long time, since the 90s. And initially, that wasn't as visible or as big a problem because, in many ways, it was fueling a different kind of economy. Now, whether you think that this is an economy that's a positive or a negative, what it basically was putting more attention of the service industry, and especially a service industry focused in London, where it required a lot of people working low wage jobs 24 hours 7 days a week.
yeah.
um, and that was helped by immigration, by immigrants who were willing to take up low wage jobs. Um, and the Labour Party under Tony Blair was very positive about this change because Tony Blair's was a very neoliberal framework. He supports neoliberal economics.
Yeah.
Later on, it became a problem when Ed Miliband was running in 2015, because we had everyone will remember, we had these caps, these Labour Party caps that said controls on immigration. And this was seen as a betrayal of liberal values of immigrants. It was seen as mildly racist, basically. And then obviously Labour had elected a very left-wing leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and during that, all of that kind of discussion ended. But the UK had just voted to leave the EU. They had voted for Brexit. Now, what happened once the UK voted for Brexit is that the Prime Minister then, after first it was Theresa May, then it was Boris Johnson who basically signed the final deal. And what happened was you had COVID. So during the lockdown, you had basically immigration was completely stopped for a while because people couldn't come in for obvious reasons. And then the rules would change so that the immigration system was no longer mostly just EU people from the European Union, but they had to decide on what rules they would accept for immigration for immigrants from everywhere. So they came up with this skilled worker visa, which included all sorts of professions which most people would not think are particularly skilled. So it included a lot of very low paid jobs, and it included both jobs which were in need, which we didn't have enough of, for example, healthcare staff at the time, and especially social care. So taking care of older people, people with disabilities, which is a very big problem in the UK. The care sector is in complete disarray. Uh, and but it opened up to everyone, and people back then said, oh, this is good because it is fairer, it is less racist than what we had before, because it means that people who are from Africa or from Asia will have the same opportunity to compete for visas as people from the EU.
Could I
What
could I ask you about that,
Yeah,
Stella?
yeah,
So
yeah.
so you said people would say that as see that as less racist. What's the reasoning behind that, for example?
Well, less racist. I'm just saying how you could, because they would say that, why is it that only someone from the EU before, less racist actually may be the wrong term, but they said, oh, it's progressive. They try to show it as progressive because it means
Yeah.
that if you have the skills, if you have the degree, if you have the whatever, and you're willing to do the job, then it doesn't matter where you're from, you will be given a visa. That
Yeah.
was, I don't think that was behind the reasoning. I think this just happened, and then that was a way for people to spin it in the media. But what actually happened was that straight away the Home Office and the Treasury did not have their eyes on the numbers. They did
Mm.
not predict how many people would come in, and they were not controlling how many people were coming in. They were
Yeah.
not controlling how many people were being accepted for visas. As long as the boxes were ticked, they were letting people come in. And most erroneously, one, people were allowed to bring in dependents. So you would have people coming in to work in the care sector, earning maybe 30K a year, and
Yeah.
they would be bringing their partner and their 3 or 4 kids. And all of these people, the state would have to find, they would have to find housing, they would have to find
Yeah.
school places, doctors, all of these things. Now, the other problem was, of course, that a lot of these people were exploited because immediately you had both universities and care worker companies that just started showing up, that were there taking money from immigrants who wanted to get a visa in the UK, sponsor the visas, and then never actually give them a job. And loads of
Yeah.
people were left in limbo because of this. There are literally loads of people living in the UK right now who have sold off their small businesses back in Sri Lanka or in Nigeria or wherever else, completely uprooted their lives and their families, came to the UK thinking, I'm going to find a job, I'm going to, build myself up and all of that. And there is no job for them here. And now they
Yeah.
find themselves in a situation where they're being universally hated, basically.
Yes. Yes. And look, obviously, this is very charged politically. What do you think of Keir Starmer's? He described it as he infamously, by now, he described it as an island of strangers. Britain was at risk of becoming an island of strangers. Are you somebody who thinks that term was racist, or do you criticize the rhetoric that he used in that speech? What's your thinking, and what's your position on, that particular speech, and also the new moves of the government to potentially drastically limit migration?
I think you can use that term in a way that is left wing and that is consistent with Labour values. I think the mistake Keir Starmer did is that, one, this is not an authentic argument to himself, and it was very obviously a reaction to the reform results during the local elections. Now, I have to say the measures were already happening. The white paper, he made this speech because he was announcing a white paper. A white paper is basically a proposal that the government is going to consider to make law. And some of the changes in there will be changes that they don't need to introduce new law to make. But that's basically what a white paper is policy before it becomes formal. And so that is something that they have been working on for a long time. It's not something that he just decided on the hoof because of the local elections, where reform did really, really well. Reform is the right of the Conservatives Party that's led by Nigel Farage, which used to be in the fringes, but now it looks like it has a fighting chance in the next general elections. So it looked like a reaction, and to me, when I see that, I'm thinking, who is making public policy if this is how you are reacting? You are reacting to another small party, and you're using language that you know how it's going to be interpreted. You know your own support base is going to feel very alienated from it. And it's not like you're going to have any reform voters or any conservative voters who will, maybe some conservative voters, but the hardcore reform voters are not going to vote for you just because you use that word. Whereas a
That's the
lot of the
Stella.
people, sorry?
I was gonna just point out. I mean, part of the risk here, though, is that there are a lot of Labor voters who voted Labor at the last election, and it seems, based on the polling, they are leaving to vote for Reform and Nigel Farage.
Not
That
that
that does
many,
seem
not
to be
that
part of the
many.
problem.
It looks like that on Twitter, but it's not. It's not. It's a lot more are leaving. A lot more are either not going to show up to vote for Labour, or they are going to vote for Greens or Independents or Lib Dems. So that's the problem. So even though in my politics, it would be perfectly consistent to make some of the points that Keir Starmer made, but that is because in the 10 years that I have been talking about British politics, for me as an immigrant in the UK, I'm very proud about British culture. I'm proud about the British people. I have no problem talking in a patriotic way about the UK. But that is also because
Yeah,
I'm Greek. So this is in my national character and personality to be like that. It is not in Keir
yeah,
Starmer's, and it is simply not in a lot. And when he's making that argument, he's
yeah,
alienating a lot of his actual base. So there is nothing wrong with his policy proposals, the changes that he's made, like there are arguments that you can make about some of them, but mostly it is fine because everybody agrees immigration needs to go down. It is insane that it tripled within a matter of years under a conservative government that promised to decrease immigration. We don't have enough jobs for these people. We don't have enough housing. We are,
So I guess your position is you do agree with decreasing migration, but your problem is with the rhetoric that Keir Starmer is using.
And my problem is with the entire strategy. There needs to be a strategy in place, and it needs to be not just in terms of communication and rhetoric and how do you retain your base and you do not offend the people who support you, but also you are suddenly saying that you're going to stop giving out care worker visas. And you are very right, because a lot of the people who have come here, they will not be able to find jobs. If they have been given a visa where they can bring a lot of dependents, that is a problem. In the short term, at least, that's a problem. And most definitely, a lot of people would say it's a problem in the long term. But how are you reinvigorating the sector? Do you have any plans about how you're going to increase the salaries of care workers so that you can incentivize more native locals to go into the care sector? And I'm not sure that exists right now.
Yeah. Look, all good points. I wanted to ask you, to the broader question of social cohesion. So, I mean, you talk about how, you're proud to be, proud of the British people. You're like almost like patriotic, I guess, about Britain. You're a Greek migrant to Britain. It's interesting, we're both, I guess, my family are migrants. You migrated yourself to Australia. Listen, I'm interested, right? When do you think a migrant assimilates into the broader culture? And do you think assimilation is part of the important, discussion here? Do you think that there needs to be a greater focus on assimilation? Do you think that it is the case that right now there is a big breakdown when it comes to, groups that are coming to Britain and there's not assimilation? In fact, there are people who are actually quite openly hostile to Britain, openly hostile to the sort of general ethos, the political values of Britain. What's the solution there?
Yes, I do think it's a problem. And I think that there are two types of problems. There are problems you can legislate for and problems that you cannot legislate for. And I do think that assimilation is extremely important. There are a lot of pockets in the UK who, for many reasons, and it's not just because the immigrants who have come have like just banded together and they are from cultures where blah, 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 blah. Like, it is also massive underinvestment in a lot of these areas, right? Like, a lot of the decay that you see on the UKification account, for example.
True.
I could show you white people who have exactly the same behavior and the same visuals. And that's because these are people who live in countries that the government has forgotten completely. And on the specifically on Islam, right, and Muslims, and that is a problem that I discuss a lot with my Muslim friends, and I have all sorts of Muslim friends. I have Muslim friends who are very devout, and they don't eat pork, they don't drink alcohol, all of these things. They pray 3 times a day. But they are smart, intelligent people I want in my society, people who I love, and all of these, like people who are no threat to the UK. They are a great addition. And then I have other friends who are just Muslim because they were born in a Muslim family, but they don't really practice apart from, when they're with their family, they will be like, whatever. And what is clear is, one, the change needs to come from inside the community. And I think a big problem in the UK is that you've had a lot of Muslim leaders who, rather than doing what is in the best interest of their communities, which is encourage them to modernize, encourage them to be more open, encourage them to learn English, to dress in a westernized way, all of these things, which all of these are things that are actually in your benefit when you are an immigrant, because they help you at the end of the day have increase your social status in a society. It's not just the society who needs to bend over to your way of life. It is also quite smart. It is an intelligent thing as an immigrant to try to adapt. But on the other hand, Islam is a very new religion. Christianity, Judaism, they've had a lot more years to discuss all of these things. And this is why you see now, whenever...
Just out of interest, do you mean a new religion in terms of a new religion to Britain, or do you mean just in general it's a new religion?
In general, I think that they haven't. What I'm being told is that the Islam hasn't had the same amount of time, which is true. They haven't had the same amount of time to have their own, their own wars and whatever else, where they are deciding on what each different side thinks on each different thing. And this is why, for example, you see at the moment, every time that from inside the group, Muslims come out to be more pro women, pro LGBT rights, anything like that, they literally risk their own lives to do this. Now, I know that there will be people
Look,
who are saying, yeah, okay,
I do want to,
Islam is
like,
not a new
yeah,
religion.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So we've got some
you
comments
can
like
say
that.
that, but it's a massive religion. It is a massive religion. It has had less time than Christianity. There was a time, if you look through how Catholic Irish people were viewed when they first went to the USA, they were literally the Americans who were anti-immigration were saying exactly the same things about Irish Catholics as we are saying now about Muslims. They are homophobic, they are bigots, they are sexist, they hate women, and they probably had a point. There probably did exist Irish Catholics who were bigots. They probably did. It was probably part of their culture, right? It probably was. That doesn't mean that they were irredeemable. And I'm
True,
not
true.
trying to gaslight people and say,
Yeah,
oh, Muslim countries are just as nice and progressive as we are. Absolutely not. I'm not saying that.
yeah.
I'm just saying Muslims are not irredeemable.
Look. Of course, I don't think anybody is irredeemable just based off their religion. Of course not. And you do raise a point that, you know, Islam has not necessarily had the great reformation that Christianity had. I mean, you are correct to an extent that, you know, it is, I think, 600 years older. I think 600 years younger than Christianity. I think it was around the 600 CE period. But and look, I see your point here. I guess the question would be, I mean, Irish Catholics, they might have had similar problems to do with, you know, integration when they first moved to America, but they seem to have been basically fully assimilated into American culture. We have a lot. It appears to me, obviously, you know, I don't live in Britain, but I have traveled to Britain a couple times. I was there only a couple years ago. I went to some towns, and, you know, some of these towns are, you know, very sectarian, right? Really divided based on religion. You can walk through some of these towns, and you don't see English people necessarily, English by ethnicity. I think, you know, and I guess what I'm, you know, there's a distinction between British nationality and then the English ethnicity. I mean, that's a good question too, right? Do you think that English ethnicity is something different to British nationality? Like, sorry, that's maybe a bit of a divergent, but what are your thoughts on that? There was a recent debate where, you know, there were people saying that Rishi's not English. I think Rishi is culturally English, but I guess ethnically is Indian.
Yeah, no, you know
What do you
what's the
think
problem
about?
with that? So the problem with that is that at the moment you would say I'm ethnically Greek, but my
Yeah,
grandparents were the
and me too.
refugees from Turkey. They were they were
Yeah,
Pontic Greeks. They were very, very dark
yeah,
skinned. They weren't speaking Greek when they came to Greece. They were speaking a very bastardized version of Greek that people
okay,
do not understand. Like there are literally Turkish people who speak the dialect my grandparents spoke when they came here, but
yeah,
my parents, but Greeks don't speak it. So
yeah,
what happens with ethnicities across history is
yeah.
that you have disparate groups of people, which eventually they all blend with each other, and then you have a new definition of a nation. And the English nation,
Is
now
a thousand years old, to be fair.
we have to come to terms with the fact that the English nation is going to now include people who are black and brown.
Look.
because
I
this
think,
because once
yeah,
these people have been there for long enough, you cannot say that, like, third generation Caribbeans who, like, they open their mouth and they sound literally like the queen is speaking from her grave, that you
yeah.
cannot tell me that these people are not English. And
Oh,
it
look,
is
I think
it is a
culturally English. Like here's a question, right? Here's an example. I'm Greek Cypriot by ethnicity. My family background, as far back as we know, Greek Cypriot on both my parents' side. But if I were to go to Cyprus, I don't speak Greek. And, you know, I love Greek culture and everything. But to be honest, if I were to go to Greek Cyprus, I'm not sure how much I would be able to integrate, right? To an extent, I'd probably feel a bit like a foreigner because I don't speak Greek, and language is such an important part of it. And so, like, and that's interesting, right? Like, I'm ethnically Greek Cypriot, but if I were to move to Cyprus right now, not speaking Greek, and having basically been raised my entire life as an Australian, basically very westernized, there would be that big cultural divide. So I guess I definitely think that you're right, that people can be absorbed into the British nation in terms of like British nationality. But I think English is a separate ethnicity, though, right?
But that's the thing. But you said it yourself that like England is a thousand-year-old nation. Before that, they were
Yeah.
disparate, different ethnic groups. So eventually, the same is going to happen with the England of today.
So this is
So
a question.
when at which point in
Yeah.
time do you say that a nation has renewed its genetic makeup and now it no longer looks just white? It also includes Southeast Asian people. And what
I
point does
guess
that happen?
I guess this is the question. I mean, there is obviously you're correct that there's been, like, just as a matter of fact, there's been obviously massive demographic change in England and Britain. But I guess the question is, we've got a comment here, for example, by Chris Stewart. What if the English don't want this? Or how do you? I mean, we are seeing obviously massive demographic change. It's an open question, though, to what extent the people of Britain have voted for this massive revolutionary change, because it is like a massive change over. If you just consider what England has been over 1,000 years, it is a big change. So, what's your response on that point?
I think what's happened in the last few years is a massive mistake because a lot of these, like the people who have come here, they're not going to be able to uh, have the standards of living that we consider acceptable in the UK.
Yeah.
I cannot accept the point of, the British people haven't voted for this or all of that. Nobody votes for anything because India and Pakistan and Bangladesh will tell you, we didn't vote for you to colonize us. We didn't vote for you to do whatever else. And you can have whatever argument you want about what colonization was. And I'm not saying this means now we need to have open borders, immigration should increase forever in the UK. But the reason why these people are here is because the UK placed itself as the mother of all of these nations. This is why these people came here, because they saw the UK as the promised land. Our queen is, the queen is our queen. We belong to this nation, all of these things. This is why these people have this connection to the UK. And the reason why people from other countries also come to the UK is because you speak English. And it's the cultural imperialism. And there are some, but I'm not saying this means now you have no right to have immigration policy as you want. You do. But if you're asking, like nobody, you can say that we didn't choose this. Well, nobody chose many things. I didn't choose to live in Greece and have, the EU and the IMF fuck over us and all of these things. And
Yeah, sure. Look, that's true. I mean, the question here, though, I guess, is this is undoubtedly like the greatest or the biggest change in the history of Britain. And so, we can say that as a norm. We can say that as a descriptive fact that this is the biggest change in the history of Britain. And then I guess it just becomes a question: is that a desirable thing to so revolutionarily change Britain? And the secondary point, I know you brought up the fact that Britain positions itself as the mother of all these nations through the British Empire, etc. But you see, for example, like there are massive migration waves from Latin America, massive migration waves from Francophone Africa, there's a huge sort of diaspora from Albania. I don't think Albania was ever.
Yeah,
for
it no
example,
longer is that, right?
Yeah.
So the UK, because
Yeah.
the UK is no longer the super wealthy country that it once was, I also think the UK is no longer colonizing other countries. So
Yeah.
I do equally think these people from these countries no longer should be saying that. You can no longer say that. And I do not actually think, the UK needs to be punished for its colonial history, because then all countries need to be punished because all countries have bad things in their history. I don't say that at all. From now on, going forward, the UK's immigration policy needs to be one that the government controls firstly, and which makes sense given the situation and the resources available and the jobs available and the needs available. And there will be some needs that are more pressing than others. But for example, there is no magic wand that I can wave from one day to the next to build more houses to be able to house these numbers of immigrants. Equally, there is no magic wand I can wave from one day to the next to have the amount of healthcare stuff that we need. But we can plan and say, okay, what is a reasonable number? And I also think in terms of, you're saying about how the demographic is changing. I do think that it was a big mistake with leaving the EU, where you have a situation where you're replacing the kind of mobile EU migrant that comes to the
Yeah,
UK for 5 or 6 years, then goes back to their country, like does a few jobs here, gets some experience, goes back, never brings their parents or anything. My parents don't want to move to London. They're never gonna
yeah,
move to London. And like a lot of my friends who came here for university moved back eventually. They wanted to go
yeah,
home. And it's the same about a lot of Europeans. But people from very far away countries, if you've come all the way from Sri Lanka, where a plane ticket costs thousands of pounds, then you're a lot more likely to settle here. The health services, all of that will be better. You may want to bring in your parents or your relatives or whoever else. So that is a much more difficult undertaking for the government. So it would make sense for them to discriminate in terms of which countries they take more or less people from.
I've got a question. Do you think that there are some migrants to Britain right now who are unintegratable? There is just such a problem when it comes to the cultural divide, the poverty that exists in some of these communities, like the assimilation's not working, and we see this from, like, for example, the UK page. What do we do about the fact that there does seem to be the case that there are some migrant communities in Britain
Yeah.
that there's, for example, really high spread, like, not to single anybody out, but for example, like, the Albanians, like, there's a really high rate of criminal arrests when it comes to young Albanian men, like massively disproportionate for their population figures in Britain. Also, we see the now infamous grooming gang scandal, which was just so disastrous from a from any perspective. When it comes to multiculturalism, the grooming gang scandal, I think, is just such a disastrous, radioactive event in the history of modern Britain. So what do we do about situations like this, where, like, there does seem to be cases where there are some migrants who come into Britain, they have a really low view of Britain, they don't want to assimilate, they don't like the country, there's a lot of poverty, like they might want to be part of a sectarian community, etc., silo themselves off. What do you do about this issue?
I mean, I don't know what they want to do if they had the option to integrate and get jobs that pay them and all of that. I'm sure most people would have picked that. I think what you're describing is an example of complete state failure. And I'm not saying this
Can I ask
here.
one thing as well? There's one other question. Sorry, not to interrupt you, but
No, no worries.
there was there's the question. People sometimes say the problem is, it's state failure. There's massive economic problems in these communities. If you go to some of these post-industrial towns in Northern England, there's really bad poverty, and so the problem is, and not enough economic investment. And I guess you would know this because you follow the far right on Twitter and stuff like that. These people the far right now mocks this kind of argument by going, oh, well, if only there had been a couple more, for example, like youth clubs with foosball tables, then you wouldn't have had the Pakistani grooming gang scandal. And, that is now a common talking point. What's your response to that?
No. I disagree with that. I think that there is
Okay.
obviously racism against white people in those Pakistani communities. Like, this is no secret. It is obvious that, and I know that because, as I said, I have a lot of Muslim friends. I talk to them all the time, and we have very open and honest conversation about the things that they also don't like about other Muslims, in the same way that, white British people have conversations with white British people and say, oh, this white British person is racist against Muslims. Muslims also have conversations between themselves and say, that Muslim person is being really a sexist asshole towards white girls, and this is disgusting. And then you go to the police, and if the police is, institutionally pathetic, they don't do anything about it. So that's what I mean by state failure. I don't mean just all these poor people, because being poor is not an excuse for having a grooming gang, and a lot of these people, and it's and the groomers were probably financially better than the girls that they were. Not probably, they were, because a lot of them were like drug dealers or whatever else. So that is what I mean by state failure.
Because they did systematically target underprivileged girls, like white girls in Britain, girls who were, who had fallen through the cracks of society, were coming from really poor family backgrounds, really broken family backgrounds, etc.
I think that's a failure to, in the same way that we are tackling sexism in right wing men, to tackle sexism in Muslim men.
Yes. No, again, I agree with you. I guess the question is, though, somebody in Britain might say, yes, it's all well and good. We want to tackle sexism in Muslim men, but is it the job of, say, these post-industrial towns in Britain to deal with that massive social problem? Because it is, to an extent, an important social problem. If these people, if some of these guys who have really horrible and sexist attitudes towards women, and frankly, quite racist views towards white girls and everything, if these guys come to Britain, is it really something acceptable to say, well, it's down to the British state and the British community to re-educate these men and to deal with these problems? Like, I mean, somebody might just say, let's not just have that problem. Let's just simply not allow these guys in, because these men.
It's difficult to identify these guys, right? Because I have Muslim friends who came here in their 20s, and they are all like, and there are many. Like, I have a lot of Muslim friends. Okay, I went to university in London, in a university with a lot of I have a lot of Muslim friends, and all of them, like, I have like lovely, absolutely lovely, open-minded, really so. I don't think you can have blanket bans. I do think it makes sense, and it's perfectly fair. It's perfectly fair to say, even though I know, because I know what my friends have to go through to like stay here, that it makes their life a lot easier. It's perfectly fair to say, listen, we have higher bars from some specific countries. That's perfectly acceptable to say. But that's not going to solve the problem of third generation people who live in the towns that you mentioned, because there you have then the state needs to intervene, because then it does become a problem of, you have leftist communities completely just perish, and you need to be locking these people up.
This is a really big and open question, right? Like, what do you do if it is a second or third generation migrant, somebody who doesn't have dual citizenship, etc., but they are clearly not integrated into the community and they're engaging in really vicious criminal behavior? Like, what do you think the solution is there?
You jail them. I'm sorry, that's a British citizen. You treat them as a British citizen. You jail them. We are not deporting people like who are British citizens, because then you are just showing, where do you stop if you start acting like this?
Okay, I understand. I mean, yeah, fair enough. I mean, this comes to the question, right? How do you define British identity? What makes somebody, say, British? And, what's the point at which you'd say a migrant is assimilated into the British culture and has become part of the British nation?
Well, so to begin with, there is the legal and the social meaning of this, right? And legally, we live in a liberal democracy. We are a liberal Western nation, and we believe in the rule of law and in human rights. And because we believe in these things, we do not deport people who have never lived in the country that we're trying to deport them, because this is actually racist, and it is it infringes on you lose something from your civilization when you start doing things that you are morally against, because you may think that this one person deserves it, but there will come a time where someone who you don't think deserved it has to face that kind of punishment, and then you don't like it.
Sure.
So I think that you have to treat them in the same way that you treat, like, a person who is born in the UK is a British citizen. So you have to treat them as a British citizen. It doesn't matter who their parents are. That's it.
Sure.
Now, in terms of, however, I do think that if they are not a British citizens, if they are not born here, if they were born elsewhere and they're an immigrant here, then we need to be deporting people a lot more, and we need to have a lot stricter agreements with countries like, I think it's ridiculous that a country like Pakistan will not accept people like criminals that we want to deport back to Pakistan. The British government should be strict and punish countries that do not cooperate with us in this way. We should be using our strength.
Yeah, no, look, I fully agree with you on that point. And look, you raised some pretty important points when it comes to deportation. Like, I agree. Like, I get very, I do think it is a slippery slope. It is a slippery slope when you're talking about deporting people who are citizens. I guess the question is this though, right? If somebody is a citizen, but they just are fully kind of hostile to the society and they're hostile to the British people, for example, I mean, let's assume that, say, deportation is not the acceptable outcome here, but what can be done? What should be done there? And, why do you think there is this failure to sort of try and assimilate people into Britain?
Yeah, and I think that does again depend, on it's a case by case scenario, right? Because as I said, for a lot of things, I do think that it has to come from inside the community. For example,
Yeah,
because you never know why, like, for example, people will talk a lot about hijabs, right? And obviously, I don't wear a hijab, so I don't think that the
yeah,
hijab is a nice, positive thing. I don't think, but a woman
yeah,
wearing a hijab could be doing it for many reasons. Like in her head, she could have many reasons. Like it could literally be for her a way that she feels culturally connected to like her ancestors or whatever. I do not know. There could be benign reasons for doing it. And
yeah,
so I don't think that I think that it would be against a liberal democracy's values to legislate to say that a woman is not allowed to wear a hijab.
yeah,
And it would just not be a nice sight. Now, obviously, if you could have a rule about a full veil, because that is a
yeah.
security risk, and it makes them feel really uncomfortable in a British society. Um, I think
I,
that
I think I think with the full veil, it actually, like, I agree with you. I wouldn't do anything about hijab. I think when it comes to the full veil, the niqab, I mean, that actually stops people from being able to socialize in society. To me, it's a really repressive thing, and I don't see how niqab can be acceptable or compatible with liberal democratic values.
Yeah, it is. It is really not. And even though, as I said, like for a lot of these things, I think that it should be the individual who bears the impact of their social decisions, and it should be up to their own community. It is the Muslim community from the inside, not the British government, that should be
Yeah,
going out and making the arguments for modernization and progressive values. Which is why I used to be very. Uh, like I used to always tell my Muslim friends who are hiding the fact that they are gay, hiding the fact that they are drinking, hiding the fact that they are dating,
yeah,
all of that from their parents and their grandparents. I used to say, "Oh yeah, I understand. It's very difficult because I'm from Greece, and it is very difficult to do this in Greece as well, right? Parents would really freak out on you if you tell them you're gay or something.
yeah,
Not all, but a
yeah.
lot of them."
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, but I've now changed my tune and I'm thinking, no, actually, if you're financially independent, it is your duty to tell your community who you are. It is your duty to
Okay.
explain to your community that they're delusional about the world. They are delusional about what people are like and what a good person looks like.
Look, this is interesting to me because um, you're fully on board with sort of like modernization when it comes to, say, like Islam, etc. Um, and I don't think I see that very regularly when it comes to leftists, because I think part of the problem is a lot of leftists don't even want to talk about things like this
Yeah.
because of cultural relativism and stuff like that. Do you think cultural relativism is too much of a problem here?
Yeah, I think it is a problem, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there is a good thing about the left. Like political correctness had very good reasons to exist, and we still need political correctness to an extent. And this is why, even for me, like if I was a politician, if I was Keir Starmer, I wouldn't be making a speech where I am making the entire Muslim community feel like they have to retreat in defense, because that is counterproductive. What you need to be doing is you need to be talking to people and actually asking them questions. Like I always, every time I have these conversations on Twitter, for example, with Drak Pakanle
Yeah,
and all of these things, I always when someone like a journalist sends me, for example, one of the journalists sent a survey that showed Muslim attitudes about gay rights, women, blah 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 blah. And I always take these things and I share them back with my Muslim friends who are from like very Muslim communities in the UK. And I'm like, okay, how does that sound? Tell me, what do you think about this? Blah, 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 blah. And they usually like, honestly, like they usually will have very good excuses. Like, and they will still say, yeah, actually, look, I also cannot stand, especially there is this new variety of young Muslim men, the same way that some, um young white men are becoming a bit radicalized with fascism. Some young
yeah,
Muslim men are also becoming radicalized in an antisocial way, and they
yeah,
pick up a microphone and they start spewing all sorts of nonsense. Um, and that is a problem, and Muslim people also, like most Muslim people, also find this to be a problem. But because I talk to them, I also feel like, yeah, when you look at these statistics, you get scared and you think, oh my goodness, Muslims, they're all hate us, blah, blah. And then it's like, don't know. Like, they could very easily, I can very easily imagine like a reasonable Muslim person who will have answered in a problematic way in one of these statistics.
Are you talking about these sorts of, are you talking about, for example, like those surveys that ask some Muslims living in the West their attitudes on things like apostasy, like, you know, rights of women, etc. And sometimes, frankly, these responses that we get back are quite disturbing. Like you see, I think, large numbers of people, unfortunately, living in the West who still harbor quite radical and extremist views.
So exactly. So what my friend told me, for
Yeah.
example, about the statistics is that if you ask, and how you frame the question matters, right? If you ask a person who is Muslim, do you think gay marriage should be outlawed? A Muslim person, in the same way that a Catholic person, will feel like they have to say, yes, I think it should be outlawed. But in practice, if you are actually friends with them, if they're in your social circle, if you know them, they will treat a gay person the exact same way as any other person would say. I'm not saying this is everyone who answers this question, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that homophobia
Yeah.
is not a massive problem with Islam,
Yeah.
a much bigger problem than it is. 100% it is. I'm just
Yeah.
saying this is the reason why I can't just be like, Muslims bad, that's it.
No, and look, I want to say, I always like when I discuss this issue, you know, I try and distinguish between Islamism as sort of like a political ideology and individual Muslims, and I think that's always important to do. Like, I don't think that individuals should ever be targeted or attacked. I guess the question becomes, you know, it does seem like there's so many problems when it comes to, you know, sectarianism, sometimes extremist attitudes, etc. And it feels like it's like a big imposition on, say, Britain, or, for example, other Western countries, to be like, when we have people come to this country, we're going to have to engage in massive social re-engineering, I guess, to try and de-radicalize people, push people away from sectarian attitudes and extremist attitudes. And I guess the question then becomes, you know, to what extent is it the actual, you know, responsibility of, say, you know, democratic countries to take on this burden for themselves?
No, I don't think it is a responsibility. I think that Muslim countries, especially the rich Gulf nations, they should be doing a lot more to take in a lot more refugees. They should be pouring money into all of these desperate people who are displaced and who are suffering right now all over the Middle East. So I think really there is a lot of shame and blame and guilt that should be pinned on countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, who have the means and their religion dictates that charity starts at home, and yet they're not doing that. They're not doing that.
Sure. No, of course. I want to maybe we should come to Drukpa Kunli now, because this is what made me want to bring you onto the program. Because look, I see your characterization of Drukpa Kunli as a racist account. And look, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think he actually has a pretty wide-ranging knowledge of other cultures, and he actually has I think he actually has affection for a lot of different foreign cultures. I'm interested in how you justify this attitude, and I guess this is what made me want to talk to you. Like, you were talking about this issue in terms of you know, the UK account, and it's as you know, it's become very trending. It's become a big trend on Twitter. It's got tens of thousands of people following them. It has a lot of it has an influence, frankly, on the political discourse in Britain. And I actually haven't seen really any many people on the left really engage with it. I saw your engagement with it, and I thought, you know, it's positive that you engage with it. I feel like maybe a lot of people on the left are just pretending that there isn't this massive historic change happening in Britain. And I've seen some people reflexively say that, you know, this is an account that is just basically singling out people to be attacked if they are black or brown and they're engaging in antisocial behaviors. But it doesn't look at, you know, for example, the term that people would use for poor white British people would be chav, etc. And I know you say here that really the problems that this account is dealing with, they come from lack of economic opportunity. They come from
It's
state
not just
failure.
that.
Poverty.
It's not just that, right? A lot of it is also like Muslim people who are not self-aware enough to integrate.
Yeah, of course. And I guess this is the question, right? So you were saying it's probably unfair to discuss, frankly target these people over others. And I saw at the end you said this. You said the UK is not a special victim suffering from nations being built over different ethnicities or stories of national unity being conjured up out of thin air. Shut up and do what it takes to avoid bloodbaths. And this is where it becomes a problem, right? You say that line. We have to basically police our speech or police what we say about these issues to avoid bloodbaths. And I guess my question
that's not what I'm saying. People
Sorry,
took that for me.
Yeah.
People and Farhan, you said that, I don't see any left-wing people interact with this. Well, there are no left-wing people left on Twitter. Like they've all
okay, fair enough.
Very few. Like I would say, only some fringe leftists have remained on Twitter, and then just weirdos like me. And I didn't used to be active on Twitter. I only started becoming active on Twitter after it became what it is now.
Fair enough.
So the problem. A lot of people took what I said there to mean, just shut up and accept 1 million new immigrants per year and don't talk about problems with integration. Don't talk about, Muslim men being sexist and like harassing women. But no, that is not what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah.
What I'm saying is that if you are actually going to inflate millions of white people to think that black and brown people are the problem in their society, then you are going to have a race war on the streets. Okay, and there was a time in the UK when there was a time in the 70s and the 80s when literally black people would walk down Manchester and they would get beaten up. There was a time, and this is in the living memory of a lot of black and brown people in the UK, and this is what I mean. And why the reason why I say that the account is racist is because what basically racism is discrimination, right? So and discrimination can be positive and negative. We all discriminate, and I'm a person who discriminates massively. And I was raised in a racist society, and I probably I don't really. If someone called me racist, I would probably be like, "Oh, what do you mean? You probably have a point, something that I've missed." Because it is discrimination means I like this better than that, right? Yeah, that is what it is. I think this thing is intrinsically better than something else, and there may be good reasons or bad reasons for this. And the reason why I say that the account is racist is because, as you said, it is very often showing black and brown people doing things that are in white culture, like things that white people would do as well. For example, the one post that I took great issue with was of a young Somali guy, and everyone is saying that.
That up. I'll bring that one up. Your article, because I read that before. I think it's titled "Is it a crime?" Okay, we've got this one here. This is the one you're talking about?
To lip sync trap on TikTok while Somali. And like everyone is saying, this is not a boy, this is not a young man, this is an old 40, 50-year-old Somali guy. I know that he has weird hair, but if you actually watch his videos where he speaks straight to the camera, his voice is very obviously that of a young man. Like he's very obviously like early 20s at the very least. And it was shared by another prolific person on Twitter.
A right-wing account.
Called, Charlie. What's her name? Charlie Astor, something like that.
Yeah, and is this the girl who's I've got it up on the screen? Is this the girl who said, "Please, as a pretty blonde English woman"?
Yeah, she said. And I saw that, and I think I've met her once in real life, like in London, and I feel bad when I attack, I guess, or kind of target a specific person, especially another young woman. But that particular post really hit it for me because I felt like, wait a minute, this young man is doing something that is not illegal, that plenty of white people do. He's doing a trap dance on TikTok.
Yeah.
And your main problem really is that he's ugly and he looks like he's not particularly talented in anything or charming or whatever. And he looks poor. He looks like a chav. And there was a
True.
time 10 years ago when the left would make fun of chavs for being right
Yeah.
wing and whatever. And we found that to be really, really unbecoming and very unfair. And I think this does happen sometimes with this account.
There's a comment here, and this is what they're asking you. I'm interested in what you said. Stella implicitly takes white Britain to be the standard and foundation of the country, but this is negated by her claims about a new post-white majority Britain. Why should those who supersede also? So I mean, again, I'm not endorsing this comment, but I'm wondering what you think about it or how
What
you
does
respond
it?
to it.
What I didn't get the question. Why should
Oh, sorry, I put
those?
it. It's still
Why
there.
should those who supersede also differ? What does he mean? Or does he mean whatever?
Actually, Miami Virtue. Maybe this guy can clarify a bit because I think that it is worded maybe a bit more confusing. If Miami Virtue could potentially clarify that last bit on the question, I look, it's an interesting point you raise, and I read it, and I did feel bad for the fact that this guy, he's obviously poor. He's not exactly, a stone cold stunning bloke, and he's basically the Somali equivalent of a chav. And obviously, people will have sort of like class-based discrimination against that, etc. And I read that he felt really sad and he was crying about it. I mean, that is sad to me. I guess the question is, I mean, I did watch the video. It is a kind of antisocial in the sense that, he had gun noise, he had gun, hand gestures, etc. I guess, there's a level of aggression to that, etc. But I do see your point here. I do see your point. So your argument is that really the problem is, I guess, like class and really, attitudes that people have towards class are being sort of superseded on when it comes to race.
Well, I do think it's also literally like you are bullying him because he looks brown, he looks Somalian. Like he saw the comments that everyone was making about being Somali, and they were all extremely racist. And he also made another TikTok apologizing to fellow Somalis for bringing shame to their community, basically for making them look bad.
I saw that part of your article, and it's sad. I feel bad for him. In that sense, I do feel bad for him. I understand.
Okay, why should the new majority, which is multiracial, defer to white Brits if the latter have no special claim to standards of behavior and norm? Wait, when you're saying the latter, the latter, I think you mean the multiracial new majority, but it's not. The new majority is not multiracial.
I think what he's saying,
it's still a majority white Brits.
I think what he's saying, or what these guys would say, is I've seen Dr. Cunley make this point before, where he says people do assimilate, but they're not assimilating into, say, English culture. They're assimilating to this kind of weird new fusion of, say, like sometimes you see it's like maybe like black trap music, and then it's like there's forms of like Islamism like worked into it. Like it's interesting. Like there is a form of assimilation that's taking place, but it's almost like an assimilation into kind of like a culture that it's like, I don't know how Dr. McCunley puts this, but he talks about like an international, I'm not sure, you would have seen these memes where he talks about like the sort of international roadman sort of thing that's taking place, where like if you look at like say the sort of young underclass in Canada, the young underclass in Britain, the young underclass in lots of different Western countries, they're actually very much shaped by, I guess, like sort of African American hip hop culture. They're shaped by the influence of Islamism, etc. There's Arab loan words into all this stuff. So I guess what this guy, Miami Virtue, is sort of asking is like, if there's, I guess his point is, if there's a kind of like norm of British behavior that is good and nice, how can we expect people to assimilate to that sort of norm of good behavior if there's just no longer a kind of like established cultural consensus behind it?
So what's the problem? That the same thing is happening in Greece, and it's not because we have too many immigrants. It's because we are becoming poor. It's because the country is become globalized. It's because you have all of these multinationals coming in, where our way of life, our aesthetics, the way that our shops used to look, our culture, the way we used to eat, the way we used to drink coffee, the way I was raised, is becoming less and less accessible. And it's It's not
Yeah.
because we have too many immigrants in Greece. I mean, we do obviously, refugee crisis, all of that, but that's not it. Still, everyone I talk to and whatever is Greek. And there are, I have like some friends who were immigrants. Like I have one classmate whose parents are Chinese, and he's Chinese. He looks Chinese, but he's literally the most Greek person I know. He wants to, right? Like he works in the US now, but he wants to move back to Greece and open a restaurant in our city because he's just an extremely Greek person who loves his country, and his country is Greece, even though
Yeah.
he looks 100% Chinese. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I do not like the fact that English culture and British culture is dying in a lot of places. I do not like the
Yeah.
fact that the visuals are changing. I don't like that.
Yeah.
But you could deport every last immigrant from the country, and you would still have that problem. I'm not saying this as an argument for continue immigration to 1 million a year forever. I'm just saying this is
Yeah.
why it is not, you cannot be pinning down these basically helpless actors. Like these kids born in these immigrant communities they have very little agency. Like
Yeah.
how do they know? How would they know better? How would they know to have
Look,
different
that's true.
tastes?
That's true. That's true. And look,
How do they know? How would they know better? How
yeah, look, no, I certainly see what you're saying here, and I'm trying to. Sorry, I was trying to bring back up your original tweet to Druckmann Cunley because I mean, I think you do raise this point in a way. You say, the visuals of poverty, inability to integrate, much of it because of state collapse in itself. That is an argument in favor of regulating immigration. It shows people with little resources coming to a country with depleted resources, where the promise of advancement never gets fulfilled. Look, I think yes, like that actually is a left-wing argument for managing migration in Britain, because to be honest, it actually is unfair for the migrants themselves. That when you have the massive poverty that is happening right now, it becomes a lot harder for people to integrate. It becomes a lot harder for people to assimilate. I mean, so that's kind of your position here. It more comes down to the economic collapse.
I think that it is not fair to just pin it down on random individuals who haven't done anything illegal or extreme yet. So, like this boy, I do think it's perfectly fair to say, like, especially older people or like people who have agency, who have like community leaders, that they are wrong and they are failing their own
Yeah,
communities. I think that's perfectly
yeah,
fair. So I'm not saying that nobody has any agency, like we are all like just victims. No, that's not what I'm saying.
yeah,
So I do think there is a bit of both, and as I said, there needs to be a reckoning in Muslim communities that they understand that some things are just really really terrible bad PR, in the same way that
yeah.
the civil rights movement in the US, where black people wanted to get equal rights. They started looking at how they present themselves to the
Respectability
wider
politics.
society. Yeah, respectability
Yeah.
politics, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. I think that is actually right to an extent, that a lot of this, I mean, it is undoubtedly a massive PR disaster. A lot of this stuff is a PR disaster, right? And I think, look, this is where it becomes a tough question, right? You said before that people should not be, you said before, you wanted to clarify that you didn't think that people shouldn't talk about, problems of integration, like, the problems associated with mass migration. You think people should be able to talk about that, but you cautioned that in the past that led to black people being beaten up in the streets and stuff like that. And you raised that. That was you had that discussion. You made that point when we were talking about Druckmann Cunley. Do you think so? You've called the Druckmann Cunley account racist. Do you think it feeds into violence? And how can we talk about these things if you believe it
Yes,
turns
I do
into
think it
violence?
feeds into violence. I do think it's racist. I don't think he should stop doing it, because I do think, as I've said before, I think it's a work of art. I think it's literally it's a very, it is a cataloging of a certain, it's what he says he's doing. I believe him, he's honest about this. He's
Yeah,
cataloging a certain moment of time, a certain mood, and it is these visuals that have fueled extremism as well, and this is inevitable. And this is because, what's the problem? We look in the history, and whenever we have like examples of extremism, we always think that there must have been zero reasons behind it. But if you
Yeah.
actually read through like how and I know I'm comparing this to the Nazis, and people don't like it when people do this, when the left does that, because they're saying, oh, you're crying fascism way too easily, blah 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 blah. But bear with me, if you do look at how the Nazis justified the hatred towards Jews, some of them had very good reasons to. They were saying, oh, you look at this country and most of the 70% of lawyers are Jewish or whatever. Like they had like all of these things where they could prove to you that the Jewish people have too much power and they're corrupt or whatever. And maybe
I want
some
to
of them
say,
were. Maybe some of
I
them were.
want to,
I don't know. But what
I
does
want
that
to say,
mean?
it's. I mean, to bring up the case of Germany with the Nazis and stuff is very interesting because it's actually fascinating in the sense that like the Jewish community in Germany were actually extremely well integrated and assimilated into the German society in at that time. Like for example, like there were a massive amount of Jewish people in Germany who fought for Germany in World War I, etc. Like I guess the question is like how do we talk about integration? How do we talk about
How are
these things
Asians
without
not well integrated in the UK when Rishi Sunak was prime minister? How?
look?
How can you say
But
that? How can you say that brown people are not well integrated in the UK when they're literally,
I got
you
2
know?
points in response to that. One, I wouldn't say. One, I want to clarify that I've never said that brown people haven't integrated as a whole. That's not my position at all. The second point I was going to say is Rishi Sunak. I think he's an outstanding individual in the sense that if you were to listen to Rishi Sunak, he literally sounds like a posh English person. He goes to Oxford. He's extremely well
But loads
educated.
of
He's high.
brown people do. Loads of brown people do.
Yeah, sure. Lots of people I know, but like when we're talking about, for example, like the disaster that is kind of like Luton, for example, and it's tied up with massive amounts of poverty, lack of integration, stuff like that.
They sound
I
like
feel
the
like
white people who live in the area.
true, yeah, that is true. That is true. But it is like undoubtedly a big problem though, where there are migrant communities that have come, and I don't think anyone would be able to say that Rishi Sunak is representative of, for example, like say what's happening in Luton.
No, but he is a very representative example of Indian diaspora in the UK.
India, yeah,
Like
I agree.
Indians, a
I
lot
think,
of Indians in the UK really are like, that's the problem. Like that's where it becomes a problem. And then it's like, I always
that's
have
the
to,
thing.
and it's, you have the philosophical
Yeah,
questions, which are interesting and nice, but you have to always bring it back to, okay, what are the policy solutions and the legislation? You can do political rhetoric
yeah,
all you want. And if you are a
yeah.
politician, I think it's best that you actually filter to what is going to be the most effective and bring people together and bring them with you. And then you have the legislative solution. So you have to really be you have to decide. And the problem is that a lot of the people who adore Drakpak's account, their
Yeah.
solution seems to be deport every single one of them, which is called ethnic cleansing actually, and it's something that we don't like. And every time it happened in history, we have come to deeply despise it, and it's just created a lot of misery.
I mean, true. Look, the question becomes: you've said that you think that the account Mytho UK is artistic. You think he shouldn't stop doing it, but you think that it does feed into like racism and violence. Do you have an actual concrete example of where it feeds into violence? And I guess that's also the second question, right? Like, how do you, if you say that this feeds into violence, how do we have a discussion about? How do we talk about the like undoubted change? So, like, here's a good example, right? Like, I brought up the page to show people what we're talking about. Like, he just retweets, he's cataloging big instances of cultural change in Britain, right? I don't think anybody could argue that 50 or 100 years ago, female genital mutilation was an issue in Britain. It
Yeah,
now
yeah,
is.
100%. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
now is as a result of mass migration. And it's interesting because he doesn't actually comment on it. He doesn't add any commentary to it. But obviously, you are right that a lot of the comments are basically saying people should be deported, etc. I guess my question is though, like, why should it be the case that female genital mutilation is now a problem that Britain has imported to itself? Like, if it wasn't a problem
It's
in Britain,
terrible, and he
now,
shouldn't stop doing it. It's terrible, and it should
yeah,
have been, it needs to be. Yeah, I don't think he should not do that. Like I think it's just a matter of fact that people are just becoming radicalized because they spend all day on Twitter or. For a lot of people, a lot of these right wingers, they don't have any Muslim friends. They genuinely do not have any Muslim friends. So the only
true.
representations they see of Muslims is Twitter, and then they will spot either Muslim tourists in central London or poor Muslims in like suburbs or whatever. So if this is the only representations you have of Muslims, you are going to be a lot more scared of them, and you will be a lot more um, uh, willing to like advocate for things like mass deportations of people who were born here, which is, you know, cruel and terrible, and you won't know the consequences until this starts becoming more popular.
I guess this is the question, right? Like, we would surely agree that migration has to have a positive impact for the host population or the original population of Britain. When you have, for example, like, you know, this is the funny thing. I mean, here Druck McCunley has found an account that is actually somebody from, I think, the Middle East, who's saying that back home looks better than the roads in the UK. When it does have this, you know, level of poverty and, you know, sectarianism, would you say it is leading to a good thing for the people of Britain? And I guess this is a secondary question: to what extent should the British government's main focus be, for example, on the original inhabitants of Britain and the population of Britain versus people overseas and migrants?
Sorry, do what? What was the verb you used? I didn't hear that.
So to what extent should the British government's focus be on the original British inhabitants of, you know, of the country versus, for example, migrants? Because I see, for example, I'm not saying that this is your argument, but I see some people on the left argue, well, it's wrong for the government to like prioritize citizens over anybody overseas because that discriminates. And therefore,
yeah, no, they should prioritize citizens. They should prioritize citizens,
yeah,
and they should prioritize citizens, and they should. And I do agree that. And this is why I think that you can't have people. Sadly, and it is sad. It does mean that people will have more difficult lives, and it will be harder. But you cannot have immigrants bringing more people than they can themselves take care of.
yeah,
Because the British state is not in a state to accommodate all of that. And you ask me, is it a good thing that all of this is happening? No, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that you have so many people who are in the UK who are not integrated. It's not a good thing that in the last few years you've had so many people who arrived here who are literally living, you know, almost
parallel
on
lives.
the margins of the matrix, right?
Can I ask you, Stella? I mean, this was one that went very viral recently, and it does come from GB News.
Yeah, that was horrible. That was despicable.
Yeah. Well,
And it was despicable because, okay, this man, he may well
let me
be
play it
like.
for maybe I'll play it, and then I want to ask you, like as a leftist, how to respond to it.
Yeah. Why should English people pay for you to have a house?
Maybe they give me house, they give me anything I can need. They give me.
Just give it.
Yeah.
Why?
Like, obviously, it's a PR disaster. I'm interested, as a leftist, what should be the correct response to something like this?
Yeah, so this man cannot speak English, very obviously. So I'm sure that if you spoke to him in his language and he asked him, do you think someone else needs to give you a house for free? He wouldn't say, he would say no. I think I would like the opportunity to get a job, work, and then use my salary to pay my own rent. I think that is what he would have said. Now, people are seeing him and they're saying, we don't know where he's coming from. We don't know his circumstances. But let's just say this is an economic migrant who's trying to use the refugee route to move to the UK as an economic migrant. Now, in the moral universe of this person, though, I want you to imagine that you are born in Ethiopia in extreme poverty. Would you not just start walking west? If your situation was this desperate and you thought, I can go up there and I will get a job and I will be able to work and I will be able to. I don't think that this person is thinking I'm gonna go there and I'm going to live for free. He's thinking I'm gonna go to a place where the streets are clean and I can make money and, like, you know.
Yeah, look, I understand. As if I was born in that situation, I probably would do the same. But I guess, as you said, as you said just prior, the government's perspective has to be, focusing on citizens, and so obviously that then,
Yes, it is not. It is not. It is not our problem. It is not the British government's responsibility to save every poor person in the world. Absolutely
Yeah.
no, it isn't. But am I going as a British journalist? Am I gonna go and speak to a person who is living in a tent in a refugee camp and who doesn't speak English and ask him something that he doesn't understand, and then use that clip to prove that look at these parasites, what they're trying to do? Is this not fueling racism? Is this not making people think that Africans are all insects or whatever else? Obviously, this is what this is doing.
I see your point. But do you think, for example, your argument, I guess, is the main problem here is the language barrier. Do you think that, what if it actually were to be reflective though of his views? Like, do you think there's a chance there, or
I don't think that seeing that he speaks English the way he does, that he completely understands how the UK works as a state. He clearly should not be in the UK. He clearly should not come to the UK because he will not be able to integrate, given his.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Obviously.
Yeah, okay.
So I don't think, I think that he lives in a different planet from us. So I think that it makes no sense to try to like maybe you know what, like how do you know, like maybe people back there, like you don't know whether in the moral universe that he lives, that he grew up with, whether he has sufficient information to understand the implications of what he's saying. You really cannot say that from that video.
Yeah, look. Okay, I see your point. I mean, he doesn't seem to be an educated person. Doesn't seem to be able to speak English. I do appreciate the fact that you accept like he shouldn't come to Britain. Do you think that there's a problem where there are people on the British left? I mean, like, how do you think someone like Diane Abbott or Jeremy Corbyn would react to this type of video? Like, do you think that there would be some on the British left who think, it shouldn't be held against him? He should be able to come to Britain. And do you think that is a problem?
Yes, there will be people who have. There will be people who have. And it is nice. It is a nice thing about British political culture that they have sympathy for people. They have sympathy for human beings. I don't know whether Diane Abbott or Jeremy Corbyn would, on the merits of his case, I'm sure that they would say that his case needs to be looked at and like he needs to have a fair hearing. And I do not have that access to that information. But looking at this video, I'm thinking this is a man, for me personally, who is not going to be able to integrate, and therefore I think that he should not. We should not be having more people like this. They are not going to be able to integrate, and we need to make sure that we don't encourage more of them to come over here as well, because they're just going to become a part of an underclass that will not, will not get the kind of standards of living that we want people in the UK to have. So yes, I do think there will be. I do think that this is not something that that someone like who is as left wing as Jeremy Corbyn or Diane Abbott will tell you. I do think that for them it would be a shameful thing to say, and I think that there are merits to having that attitude. I think there are some good, humane, civilized qualities about having that attitude. I do not have that attitude because I am realistic about the practicalities of having more and more people like that coming here.
Look, very fair. I mean, this comes to the question: what do you think the line is for integration and being able to assimilate into British culture? I mean, like, how to make that decision?
I think that speaking English is very, very important, and I do think that it's right that there is a test for that. And in the same way that
so you would agree with you agree with what Keir Starmer said recently about you have to speak English to migrate to Britain and be British?
That's a problem. Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Why do you think there are some people, for example, on the British left, who would say? I mean, I saw people say that comment in particular was reminiscent of like Enoch Powell and stuff like that. Why do you think they think that way? And do you think that type of attitude is pushing people away from the British left? It's really bad for the political left's chances in Britain?
I think the people who are against this are doing this because there are real situations where this is actually causing people to be miserable and it's making people's life difficult, and they have empathy with these people. So, for example, someone bringing their spouse, and we have good reasons for wanting the spouse to speak English, but you are basically breaking the family apart by not letting them bring them unless they speak English. Or a lot of people will have parents or grandparents themselves whose English is not particularly good, and they will think, but wait a minute, my dad or my granddad is a great person, he's a great human being, and I think he contributed a lot, and he worked very hard despite the fact that he wasn't fluent in English. And that's fair enough. But at the same time, as a government, you have to make decisions where you pick winners and losers. And this is what policy is about. This is what government making is about. You pick winners and losers, and sometimes, sadly, there will be losers.
Yeah, look, I actually agree with you there. And yeah, I'm actually in full agreement with you. I guess this then comes back to the original point about Keir Starmer. Like, I know you said that you thought that, some of his rhetoric was wrong and, maybe the way he was approaching this politically was wrong. But to be honest, when we drill down into a lot of these topics, it seems that you agree with him on a lot of these issues.
I agree with the policy issues. I just I don't sympathize with him as a politician because his entire political narrative from his entire career is different from mine. And obviously, I will defend him when I go, on the media because I see it as my role to defend the Labour government when I can and to explain to the general public the reasoning behind what the British government decides to do and not to do. It doesn't mean that I always agree with them, but I do think that it's important that some people explain why it is when the Labour Party decides to do something that they do that, because I have insight into that. So, but Keir Starmer I never had the same kind of political brand as Keir Starmer. So, and that's because for me, I have always been a lot more comfortable with doing the thing that Keir Starmer was not comfortable, which is being a very patriotic, pro-British patriotism, blah, blah, blah. So for me now, I feel like, so what I would rather see Keir Starmer do, for example, is put his lawyer hat on and give us the legal analysis for come out against the ECHR being used as a living instrument by the courts in Strasbourg. I think that would be a lot more fitting to himself as a person. He would never do that, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, look, okay, that is interesting. Part of this is maybe actually, being Greek, because I know, for example, in Greece, patriotism is much more accepted. Like, if you look at, I think maybe Drukpa Cunley's actually made this point before, like, if you look at countries like Greece, like, people will wave the flag very openly, but it does seem to be this kind of, in Britain, it does seem to be this thing where a lot of people on the Anglo left have always felt uncomfortable about it. And it goes as far back as George Orwell was writing about this in World War II, basically saying, there's a problem where a big part of the left just hates kind of, patriotism. Why do you think that actually is? It's sort of, why do you think there's that kind of guilt?
I think that it's just the English character, the national character, the needs of the UK state to come together, the needs of Britain to come together, was so that the meant that it was just not very useful to have nationalism for its different nation. And there are a lot of writers like George Orwell who speak about English nationalism and the character of English nationalism, which it does mean to be very humble about it and to find it very embarrassing when someone is being earnest about being proud about their own country, right? So this is actually part and parcel of the English character, and I think that there is something charming about it, something endearing about it. It's not something that we should bully and stigmatize English people for doing. So I think that, where Nigel Farage criticizes the metropolitan elites or whatever, Keir Starmer or whoever else, for not being, a flag-waving nationalist. What he's doing is he's attacking a very essential element of the English character.
Yeah, look, that's interesting. I mean, you are right that there seems to be an essential aspect of the English character, that sort of resists tribalism. I think Drukpa Cunley again actually says this, there's this very strong sense among a lot of Anglo people that, they hate tribalism, they hate, exclusionary sort of politics. And that's fair. That's fair. It's interesting. So you think that, your background as a Greek migrant allows you to sort of see past that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this is why, and also and that is why I became enamored with the UK and with British people, and I was able to express that love straight away. I didn't need the vibes it to happen. Sorry, can I just go very quickly? Can I nip to the bathroom and come back?
Oh, yeah, of course. No worries. Yeah, no worries. And we don't have to go for that much longer. Thank you. I know
Okay.
that you've been very generous with your time.
Okay, cool. Maybe you can think about a final question. And
Yeah, I'll think of a final question. No worries. Yeah.
Cool.
I'll turn it to the chat. Guys, what do you think? What would you like me to ask Stella as a final question? It's been a really interesting discussion. I think we actually see eye to eye on a lot more than people might think based on Twitter. I think she actually is fair in the sense that she accepts that, there's a big problem when it comes to, integration and assimilation, Islamism. I do strongly disagree with the idea that Dr. McCunley is promoting racism and violence. I don't think just talking about it is going to lead to violence and racism. But I understand, these are obviously very highly emotive and charged issues. And look, I actually think that Dr. McCunley himself avoids anything personally that, that verges on, incitement, etc. I don't think I've never seen, for example, Druck McCunley actually make anything inciting. He makes comments. He can make comments that are satirical. He can make humorous comments sometimes, but I don't think I've ever seen anything that incites violence or etc. We've got a comment by Miami. I wonder if the English character largely derives from a particular group, perhaps a group in a country named after a particular group of people who may be expressing their culture. Does Stella think Zara Sultana is an internationalist for Britain, but a nationalist for Pakistan? Can she? Look, I think that is a good question actually about Zara Sultana, and I do want to talk about Zara Sultana. Look, I'll ask the Zara Sultana question and maybe one more. I do agree with you, Con. Stella is fair, intelligent, and open-minded. Yeah, good guess. Very good guess. I'm very happy that we were able to have a great guest. And actually, I think I said this before. This is the first female guest on the Drew Pavler show. I've had way too many male guests. I have to be a bit more minded towards equality. But yes, like there's a comment by Vietran. After thousands of years of tribalism, it became the norm and race turned into a way of identifying bellies. But identity and norms evolve just as we now reject sex, and why not reject tribalism too? I mean, sure. Love it. But I'm gonna ask this question about Zara Sultana. Is there anything? Drukpa is a pragmatist and thoughtful. He tends to prefer wit over invective. Yeah, look, that's the thing. I've never actually seen Drukpa Cunley engage in invective. I think he's, even when he's being quite harsh as a critic, like he's using, he's quite witty about it. I'm gonna make this. I want to ask this question about by Miami Virtue, because I think it is an interesting one in the sense that Zara Sultana is somebody that she would certainly see to be fully integrated, etc. But it does seem that, in Parliament, she... Oh, there's another one. There's not even Zara Sultana. Who's that other British MP who I think is Pakistani, and he was the one who was calling for blasphemy laws? What's his name? He was a Labour MP as well. I want to ask about that. That would be interesting. Labour MP, blasphemy laws. What's his name? Tahir Ali. Okay, actually, this is going to be really interesting. I'm going to ask about Tahir Ali and Zara Sultana. Andrew Landu says, is Stella interested in running for office in Britain? She should. Very thoughtful and analytical contribution. Yeah, honestly, we've had a great guest. I actually do think she's been very fair in her comments. I think if you listen to her, she's being very pragmatic about, migration and, the problems of cultural assimilation. I think she is being very pragmatic about it. Yeah, good question by Lendu. I'm gonna ask that about. I'm gonna ask that about. Someone says, ask her about the throat cut MP. Who's the throat cut MP? Oh, thank you, Stella, for joining. All good. I've got one last question for you. And also, we have a comment by Andrew Landu here. Andrew is a Labour figure in Australia. His wife, Kimberly Kitching, was a very senior Labour figure, sadly passed away. But Landu says this. He says, is Stella interested in running for office in Britain? She should. Very thoughtful and analytical contribution tonight.
That's lovely to hear. Thank you so much. I would love to run. I want to run. It's just a practically difficult thing to do.
Yeah. No, very fair.
I hope my party doesn't, it's, you may have seen that it's, the party is very in favor of discipline at the moment.
Yes.
And we'll see how I look to the Labour leadership. We'll see how practically feasible it will be for me, but I would love to. Yeah. But thank you for the vote of confidence.
No, it's good. I understand what you're saying there, because that's probably my big problem with getting into politics. Like, the discipline, it's very hard. I'm not sure if you know this, Stella, but I actually am more on the Labour side of politics, and I voted for Labour in Australia. I actually agree with Keir Starmer where he's going. The last question, I was wanting to ask you about this, right? I think this one is a really tough one, right? Because I'm going to bring it up 1 second. So you look at an MP, right? For example, like Tahir Ali, and he was the one, I think, recently who made the call for blasphemy laws in the British Parliament. And he's a Labour MP for Birmingham, and someone might be able to say, oh, well, he's representing his constituents. But that was a pretty disturbing thing, I think, and it was something that a lot of people were disturbed by, his call for blasphemy laws. And the other person that somebody brought up was Zara Sultana, and I'll bring her up. And she was obviously, I'll find it. There is Zara Sultana. So she's somebody who is a Labour MP. She had the whip was withdrawn from her by Keir Starmer because of, I think she voted against him on something to do with child poverty legislation, etc. She's since become a really strong critic of him on Gaza, etc. So look, you've got these two MPs. You've got Zara Sultana and you've got Tahir Ali. And Tahir Ali, for example, Tahir Ali was calling for blasphemy laws to be introduced in Britain, which is something that's something really disturbing and something quite foreign to British culture today, right? Because it is a pretty secular culture. As a result, yeah.
So these are two very different MPs, right? And you are talking about two very different phenomena. On the one hand, you have Tahir Ali, who's calling for blasphemy laws, or he called anyway, which I completely disagree with.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a result of him being naive rather than actively trying to do to conspire to Islamify the UK. I don't think that's what he's trying to do. I think he's literally being very naive. He thinks, I'm going to show to my local community how much I support them and how much I'm trying to help them, and they will see this. He will see this as, a way to battle discrimination against Muslims or something like that. I think it is a lack of intellectual depth that has led him to the decision that this is a good idea. And also, he will be lobbied by a lot of other groups as well, who will have whatever reasons for coming to this conclusion. And there will genuinely be a lot of people who innocently think that the blasphemy law, we call it blasphemy law, he calls it, we're going to not discriminate against Islam and not be offensive about Islam because we see a lot of Islamophobia, which is true. There is a lot of Islamophobia and we need a way to combat it. And what are we going to do? We're going to legislate, which is what the country has done for a very long time, just legislate every problem into oblivion. So very different situation with Zara Sultana. Zara Sultana is a young MP, is a very left-wing MP. She was a Jeremy Corbyn supporter. As one of the commenters said, she's an internationalist. She's not a nationalist for Pakistan. She's not a nationalist for any country. She's a very progressive, very left-wing MP who is an internationalist. And yes, she will have the value that, we need to be taking care of people. We need to be humanists everywhere and all of that.
Yeah.
So
I think the reason someone brought her up was I think she was someone who was opposed to the third runway at Heathrow.
Yes, and she showed up to this. She showed up to an event.
Pakistan airport. Calling for a new airport in Pakistan.
Yeah. So the reason why I don't think that it is it is not in fact as schizophrenic as it looks to people, like her actual position, because her actual position is that we don't necessarily need another runway at Heathrow, whereas the new airport in this Pakistan in Pakistan, like near Kashmir, is going to make it possible for people to live just more normal lives and be able to whatever. So she doesn't see it as that. And I'm sure that what's going on there is her just trying to show that she supports her community. And by the way, this kind of thing is something that used to be is very normal in politics. Like, you will always have specific interests. It's just that the visuals are very unfortunate at the moment, and they should have thought about this.
I mean, the visuals are pretty. I mean, I brought this one up on the TV. I brought this up on the show. So this is an independent. I think it's like one of the pro-Gaza MPs, Iqbal Muhammad.
Yes,
and he's speaking against the ban on first cousin marriage. And we know that cousin marriage has led to a lot of terrible genetic defects. It leads to suffering for children, etc. I mean, this is part of the problem, right? Like, when we talk about this, we would probably have to say this is part of the problem, right? If somebody is literally an MP in the House of Commons, to an extent they're obviously integrated in society, right? Like they're literally an MP in the House of Commons. So you're integrated to an extent. You'd have to say you're assimilated to an extent if you're literally an MP in the House of Commons. But when they are representing quite sectarian Islamist interests, and like, for example, you've got Iqbal Muhammad, who was speaking against a ban on first cousin marriage. And I think the main reason he was doing that was because this is unfortunately a particular problem with the Pakistani community. He's obviously trying to talk for his constituents or whatever. We had Tariq Ali talking about, basically reintroducing blasphemy laws. Like, I mean, Tariq Ali, he's literally, again, a British MP, but it's hard to say, like, when you see somebody advocating such sectarian interests, it's hard to say that they've assimilated or integrated. What do you think of that
these
argument?
people, I think, I mean, I would say, like, about, and I said that at the time when there were MPs who were speaking in favor of against banning first cousin marriage. You are doing your community a massive disservice if you genuinely cared about your community. You would be telling them that it's actually something that we welcome the ban on first cousin marriage, because we understand all the reason why we don't want to do it again in the future. I understand, being worried about stigmatizing those who already are married in first cousin marriages or whatever. Sure, okay, but you should be able to use self-awareness to see what's going on. But the reason why he's doing that is because he wants his sectarian voter base to continue voting for him. So he's putting his personal interest over the interest of his community.
That's true. I mean, I guess that becomes the big problem, right? Like, if there are people voting in a sectarian way, what should British society do about that?
They should. Politicians are separate. They need to take their voters with them. When you are, a parent doesn't just feed its child ice cream for breakfast because the child is crying for ice cream. No, the parent has the information to know, and is the one who is responsible for taking decisions to the best interest of these people. It's the same with voters. Yes, we shouldn't patronize voters. Voters know what they want and all of that, but you should be taking responsibility, because you're taking responsibility for a whole society, not just individual persons.
Yeah.
And if that means that your voters are going to vote you out the next time, well, then so be it. You're not going to just you're not going to just govern by focus group, which is my problem with Keir Starmer at the moment, which is,
But, and maybe one last question. I'm interested, what do you think of Blue Labour? And they put this out. Look, Blue Labour, for people who are watching, Blue Labour is a more conservative wing of the Labour Party in Britain. I guess the equivalent in Australia would be, say, Labour Right, but I think they're actually more conservative than Labour Right in Australia. We have formalised factions with our Labour Party, but they have. You can see it. So they actually talk about reducing migration in terms of social cohesion, etc. Do you think that's a fair way to view this? Do you think this is a path for the Labour Party that's, a productive path for the Labour Party to go into, or do you think that it is, against the Labour Party's interest? What do you think of this?
So my politics are quite close to Blue Labour. I guess where it ends for me is that I do think that sometimes they have they are okay with some more regressive views, which I'm not in favor of. And I do think with immigration, they haven't found the right way to frame it yet. And, they have some people associated with their movement who will say things like, oh, the Enlightenment was a mistake, blah, 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 blah. So they do sometimes take it too far on some things. They can be regressive on some things. And on some things like LGBT rights and immigration.
They're much more concerned on that stuff.
The family unit and all of that. Yes, there are some things where you can say this were taken too far or whatever, but that doesn't mean that progress is a bad thing. Like, we are still left wing, we're still progressive, all of that. So I am quite a bit towards the Blue Labour side, even though on some other issues, I arguably am more on the soft left. But I think the problem Blue Labour has at the moment is that they don't have a lot of MPs in Parliament who associate themselves directly with Blue Labour, so they don't also have enough people making the intellectual case for Blue Labour and actually what it means under it and how it differentiates itself from like other parties.
Yeah, look, I want to say, Stella, thank you so much for joining and also giving so much of your time to was actually a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I'm going to upload it. We've got it on the live stream on YouTube, and it was actually one of my most viewed live streams. I think we had an average of about 40
yay.
viewers. Yeah, and I'm going to upload it as well, just as a standalone too, as like a kind of podcast thing. But yeah, thank you so much. I thought it was very interesting talking, and I actually think it's interesting. We actually saw eye to eye on a lot more than than people might expect, and I think you actually do see. I think you do agree with a lot of the policy Keir Starmer had.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I appreciate it a lot, Stella. Is there anything you want to add before we go or anything? But thank you so much.
That was really, really good. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I stayed, for a long time because the conversation was very, very interesting. And just great to hear from another, commentator from across the world who is of Greek descent and who's also you're an extremely keen observer of British politics, and clearly you know what's happening and what's going on. So yeah, it was really good talking to you, and I hope we will have another chat at some point again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Stella. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Very, very, very thankful for you coming on. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you. There's a great comment here. Ethnic networking by Drew and Stella. So true. The Greek mafia builds up. What do you guys think? Look, it was an interesting conversation. I do disagree with Stella on some of these things, but I think it was interesting because she does obviously concede that there's huge problems with assimilation, huge problems with a lot of these sectarian issues. She actually accepts it's an issue, right? And I think just by accepting it's an issue, just by literally engaging with the fact that it literally exists, I think she's like well ahead of like 90% of British leftists, because most of these guys just literally pretend that there's no issue whatsoever. It's interesting. Yeah, we've got someone saying I'd vote for her. Max says she was fantastic. She's gained a new follower on Twitter. I hope we see more. Yeah, look, I hope to have her on the show again. That was really good. Do you guys want to, is there anything you guys want to suggest or ask me a question or anything before I go? It was an interesting conversation. I'm very happy with how that went out, honestly. It's funny. Someone said all the simps are leaving now. The viewer count. No, the viewer count's still basically the same. We've still got about 35 people watching. I feel like I'm the only man in the UK who likes Keir Starmer. Yeah, no, I understand you. Look, I thought Keir Starmer was doing really wrong. I think he was doing really badly, but I'm hopeful that this new turn that he's taking might be successful. We've got a comment here. No, I was watching for Drew. So true. Thank you, Pickles LeBlanc. So true. This is another great comment by Con. Stella's accent is so much better than Phidias's accent. So true. Compared to Phidias, who is just a horrible person. Phidias, the Greek Cypriot, who sounds like Borat. Someone says, get Chris on again and try to get Roy Stewart on your show. Dude, I'd love to have Roy Stewart on the show, but I think he's probably much too big to come onto my show, but I would love to have it. I'd love to have Roy Stewart on. He's like legions ahead of me right now. But, it was an interesting... I'm very interested in British politics, so I want to talk to more people from it. Many more British leftists need to realize that Islamism isn't compatible with their values. Look, what I appreciate about that conversation with Stella is... she is obviously a leftist. She obviously is in favor of diversity and stuff like that. But she is able to say straight up that Islamism is bad and that there needs to be modernization in the Muslim community, etc. And I fully agree with her on that. So just the fact that she's actually able to discuss that and talk about it is really, really good. Because unfortunately, no one else on the British left can even address this. Lendu says, "Viva Keir Starmer, brilliant leader." So true, Andrew Lendu. Was Chris the guy who was scared of the brown people who goes to uni with? Oh, dude, Pickles LeBlanc. I don't think that's a fair characterization of Chris. I've said this before. You would really vibe with Carl Clancy. We'll look into that. Miami Virtue. Have you tried to get Druckpa on the show? Listen, Miami, I actually talked to Druckpa today. I invited him to come on the show and debate with Stella. He said he wouldn't do it because he doesn't want to voice docs himself. And look, fair enough. I understand. I did talk to him about it. But yeah, he follows me on Twitter and we follow each other. And look, when it comes to Druckpa Cunley, I think he's not a racist guy. I don't think he's inciting violence. Obviously, he's critical of the current system of mass migration in Britain. He's a witty guy. He doesn't trade in invective. He doesn't trade in slurs, and he's not inciting violence at all, I don't think. Drew, could you get someone from an East Asian democracy on? Taiwan, Indonesia, Philippines? Yeah, look, good idea. If you can suggest anybody, I'd love to have them on. I'd love to have somebody on from East Asia in terms of the democracy movement. Invite Firas Modad. He's a very good expert in Middle East geopolitics. Okay, I'll look him up. Firas Modad. This is a funny comment by Vietran. Not gonna lie, the Greek accent is attractive as fuck. It sounds like French and Italian mixed together. What about but look at Phidias. Phidias is a disaster. Phidias is a disaster. Stella knows for a fact that leftism and Islamism are totally incompatible with each other. Yeah, well, that's why I was able to have a good conversation with her, I think. Because, look, we obviously disagree on a lot, but at the end of the day, she actually can accept that there's a problem. Miami says Firas. Wait, is he saying Firas is good? Oh, yeah, Firas. I was scared he was saying Phidias was good. I was gonna be so upset for a second. Firas Modad. Okay, I'm going to look up Firas Modad. Viet, not really. It is a very strong accent. To each their own. Viet says, Phidias is an inbred Turkish Cypriot. So true. We do not claim him. So true. Someone from Singapore could be cool too, though it's not a democracy. The points of difference could be interesting. I'd love to talk to somebody from Singapore. Again, guys, just suggest people. I'd love to have more people on. That was actually a really good conversation. Guys, we've got to have more really interesting conversations like that, I think. Who else? Just suggest some interesting discussions to me. Con says this: Stella is proof to my thesis that Greeks speak better English than most Aussies. Interesting, Con. I'm not going to say that necessarily. Look, she does speak good English. Sneaky Ninja says, I like the Spanish and Italian accents. Lendu says housing in Singapore is very interesting. Look, I think Singapore's housing policy is legions ahead of Australia's housing policy. Do we think that Christian values are opposed to leftism too? Look, you can make an argument that a lot of the Christian moral values are actually the underpinning of modern progressivism. You know, the idea that all human beings are born equal. I'm going to drop a name, Aaron Bastani. Dude, I would do it. I would interview Aaron Bastani. I don't know what we would chat about, but I'd be happy to talk to him. I've got one of his books. Drew, can one of your upcoming episodes be about human rights in Iran and the foreign policies in Western countries regarding Iran? Yeah, good idea. I'll try find somebody from Iran and have them on the show. That would be excellent. Let's do that. We'll have somebody from the show. We'll have somebody on the Drew Pavlis show from Iran. The Drew Pavlis show is rising. What do you guys think of the beautiful setup we've got now, right? It looks beautiful, I think. Someone says Aaron Bastani is a tanky extremist. Well, I certainly do not like tankies. This must have come up on my feed as I look at a lot of far left nutters on YouTube. Get more on if you can. Will help your channel. Okay, Martin. There's a lot of the Bible that condones slavery, tribalism, and genocide, no less than the Quran. I mean, well, I'm not a Christian fundamentalist. I am a Christian, but I'm not a fundamentalist. Weeb Abu, humanity advances by 1,000 years. Look, great stream today. Great stream. I'm going to pat myself on the back. I think it was a great stream. Do you guys have suggestions for future streams? What do you think of the setup? Do you have any other suggestions, like people like Stella to bring on the show? I appreciate everybody who tuned in. We actually had, I think this was my one of my top streams ever, actually, I think. Someone says, first time checking a stream out on here. So this guy's watching on Twitter, Just Dutch Guy. Just Dutch Guy, you should go to my YouTube. The YouTube is a lot better. What about inviting George Ganitis? Yes, well said. Great guy, this George Ganitis. You know, we're obviously very pro-Greek here, aren't we? So let's bring on George Ganitis. Just the Dutch Guy. Hey, man, how you going? Yeah, dude, you should check into the YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're trying to build it up. You should interview some tankies and debunk them. Otherwise, good show. Thank you. No, I will certainly try to do that in the future. Miami, very professional setup. Maybe a painting on the wall. Which artwork would you choose? Yeah, good idea. Good idea. We should certainly get some paintings up here. I'm happy with the setup. This cost, like, I poured my savings into this, guys. These icons are very expensive. They're beautiful though. I will better vid code too. I would love for you to do a stream on Greek mythology. Get a professor guy on with an expertise in this. That'd be actually interesting. Sure, we'll do one on Greek mythology sometime. You don't always need to discuss politics and immigration. I mean, true. That's true. Pickles like bragging. Obviously, I'm very obsessed with politics, and obviously, the past couple of days with Keir Starmer, immigration has been the hot button issue. But ordinarily, my main interest is things like Ukraine, China, all this stuff. Just the Dutch guy, a nice Van Gogh or Ukrainian print. Yeah, beautiful. We'll get an original Van Gogh. We'll have, if we can get enough super chats in the chat, we'll get an original Van Gogh. Put it up on the bookshelf behind me. Look, guys, a great stream today. If you're watching, please consider liking and subscribing. Oh, just Dutch guy. Great switch from Elon's platform to here. Yeah, dude, it's a lot better to watch the streams on YouTube. And YouTube is where I'm trying to really build up my audience right now. I'm trying to build up my YouTube just in case my Twitter eventually gets taken down. So, yeah, I'd really encourage anyone who's been watching on Twitter to please go across to my YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube. Thank you, Just Dutch guy. Thank you so much. It's Marjorie Taylor Greene has been going on a lot of podcasts lately. So true. We'll get her on. Get Ian Miles Chong on the stream. Wouldn't that be a blessing? Wouldn't that be a blessing? We've been streaming live for 1 hour and 54 minutes. I'll go until 2 hours, guys. And we'll do 6 more minutes maybe, and then I'll then we'll call it a day. We'll maybe end it after 2 hours. But I was very happy with the stream tonight. It was really interesting. A lot of good discussion. Elon's platform is where you get all the juicy retarded righties that are good fun. I mean, and look, that is where I have most of my audience, and it's also where I meet most of the guests for the show. So we can't put too much shit on Twitter. Ian Miles Chong is a Gamergate veteran. What an impressive person he is. It's a bit light, but you'll check it yourself for the lighting. What are you saying, man? Nice work, Drew. Catch it tomorrow, legend. Thank you so much, Con. I appreciate it, Con. You've been tuning into all these videos. I appreciate it, man. You're one of the top people in terms of the audience. So you've been there basically every day for like 3 weeks. I appreciate it. It's cool. The people who've been watching the stream every day for the past 35 days, I salute you. Thank you so much, guys. You're helping me actually do this, because obviously I can't do this if nobody's watching it. We've done 35 live streams in 35 days. It's been pretty good. 35 live streams in 35 days. But I'm going to keep on doing it until we hit to 100 days. And then at that point, maybe I'll still be doing live streaming all the time, but maybe I'll just do 4 or 5 times a week instead of every single day. It can be a bit hard to do it every single day, but I'm trying to challenge myself. Ian Miles Chong is from Malaysia. Getting his views on Malaysian politics would be interesting, considering he never shuts the fuck up about America. Yeah, well said. But we wouldn't be able to get him to talk about Malaysia because there are a lot of like laws against against expression in Malaysia. I think you can get caned and stuff like that. So I don't think we'd be able to get him to talk that candidly about Malaysian politics. It was very funny. I think he deleted all his pro-Israel posts when somebody said that they're going to report into the Malaysian authorities, which is kind of sad, you know. Fucking hell. I'm just looking at the stats now. The average viewer count was 36 on this stream. Very happy with that, guys. That's a really good count. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody who tuned in. Just the Dutch guy says this: there's no money in the Malaysian grifter scene. Yeah, very sad, isn't it? Do you guys have any questions before we wrap up in a few minutes? I'm happy to answer any questions. But it's good. The streams are certainly building. The streams are certainly building. Someone says Kuala Lumpur is a great city, though. Yeah, look, I would love to go there. Low fat milk or full fat, Drew? I don't know, mate. Up to you. How are you such a positive person, Drew? I'm very positive. Don't you agree, guys? I'm always smiling. I'm always happy. Very positive. That said, I was super depressed yesterday when I was streaming because I was trying to get Streamlabs to work and it just wasn't working, unfortunately. If you talk with an Iranian about Iran on one of your upcoming episodes, can that Iranian be Elika Labon? Yeah, great idea. I'll try to get Elika Labon on. She's a really interesting thinker. Kanye Quest, Drew, I get your notifications every day, but I never click. I have been missing out. Well, you should tune in because you never know what you might miss on this amazing show called The Drew Pavlu Show, the Fortress of Righteousness. The tagline is Fortress of Righteousness, my friends. And we are building up a very righteous fortress here. We've had some interesting guests on. We've had people from such different backgrounds. Very interesting. Vietran says this: remove one thing, pho or LeBron. Easy, LeBron. I love pho, man. I love pho. Dude, you know Vietran, Vietnamese is like literally one of my top favorite foods. I love Vietnamese food, man. I love pho. I love my pho. I love Vietnamese chicken noodle salad. That stuff is so hard. Zoom in a little bit so we can see your eyes better. Crop in the books behind. We do need the cactus for sure. Okay, yeah. Look, I'll try zoom in next time. Would you interview someone from the Scarlet Alliance? Jesus hung out with sex workers too. I don't know what the Scarlet Alliance is, but sure, I would. What's the Scarlet Alliance? I'm looking them up. The Australian Sex Workers Association. So what do you want me to discuss with them about? Like the legality of sex work or something? Sure. I mean, you're true. You're right. Jesus hung out with the sex workers. I'm a Christian, but I will talk to anybody. So you hate black people who succeed in life? You fucking dude. I like LeBron, but I love my pho. It's a great food. It's a great dish. Guys, the Drew Pavlou show is going very well. I think the Drew Pavlou show is going great. I want to thank everybody who's been watching. How does immigration impact sex work? Yeah, sure. We'll have a big discussion on that. Vietran, just fucking with you. I can tell, man. I can tell. Listen, I want to shout out everyone who's been watching. Thank you to Vietran. Thank you to Pickles LeBlanc. Thank you to Just Dutch Guy for tuning in on YouTube. Thank you to Kanye Quest. Thank you to Sneaky Ninja. Thank you to Con. Thank you to Weeb Abu. Thank you to who else? Thank you to Miami Virtue too. Miami Virtue had some interesting comments and questions. Thank you to Amezigen Liberation. Yeah, look, thank you everyone who's tuned in. I'm very appreciative. Sneaky Ninja, thank you so much. No, thank you guys. And thank you for putting this up. I know how much work it is. Guys, we're putting in the hardcore work. 35 streams in 35 days. But yeah, look, guys, I might call it a day now. Thank you so much. I'm very happy with tonight's program. I think the program is rising. The Fortress of Righteousness is certainly soaring to great heights. Miami Virtue says, thanks, great chat, great show. Thank you, mate. No worries, Slava Ukraine. Yep, as always, Slava Ukraine. And we love Western civilization. We love freedom and democracy. If you're opposed to freedom and democracy, it's going to be a bad day for you because we love it. We love it here on the Drew Pavlou Show. Kind Quest, have a good night, sweet prince. Thank you, sweet prince. Sleep well, peace. Thank you, guys. Salute. Thank you for joining the Fortress of Righteousness. 2 hours work, that's enough for an Aussie. So true, so true. An Aussie Greek. Great ethnic networking tonight, guys. Great stuff. The Greek mafia rises in strength. Thank you so much, everybody who's tuned in. That'll be all today for the Drew Pavlou Show. Thank you. Thanks for joining the Fortress of Righteousness.